The chandeliers of the West Haven Grand Ballroom sparkled like frozen stars, casting a golden glow across marble floors and champagne towers that stretched higher than some of the guests' ambitions. Tonight was supposed to be a celebration, an exclusive gathering where the Whitmore family, one of the most powerful white dynasties in the city, flaunted their success. The center of the night was a $900 million acquisition deal that would expand their empire and tighten their grip on global markets. Guests glided across the floor in glittering gowns and perfectly tailored tuxedos, sipping champagne and whispering about profits, stocks, and legacy. Every laugh was polished, every gesture rehearsed. This was a room where power wasn't just displayed, it was performed. And then she walked in, Danielle Brooks, a striking black woman in a simple ivory dress, no diamond necklace, no glittering badge of wealth, no outward sign that she belonged among billionaires. She didn't arrive with an entourage, nor did she care for the spotlight. She stood by the champagne tower, quiet, composed, her presence drawing attention not because of extravagance, but because of poise. But in rooms like this, silence and dignity often provoke the cruelest responses. "Hey, Blackie, go serve." The words sliced through the ballroom, cracking against crystal and marble. A ripple of laughter followed, sharp, eager, feeding off the arrogance of the woman who said it. Behind her, a half-circle of men in tuxedos smirked as if this were entertainment. One even snapped his fingers at Danielle, the way someone might summon a waitress. Danielle did not flinch. She lifted her phone slowly to her ear, as if their cruelty were nothing more than background noise. The Whitmores and their circle watched her with smug delight, convinced they had put her in her place. To them she was invisible, irrelevant, a nobody who dared to walk into their celebration. But what they didn't know, what none of them could possibly imagine, was that the woman they mocked wasn't there to serve drinks. She was there to serve judgment, and before the night was over, their billion-dollar celebration would turn into the stage of their public humiliation, because Danielle Brooks was no stranger to rooms that doubted her. She had been underestimated her whole life, and tonight she was ready to remind them all, the most dangerous person in the room is the one you refuse to see. The laughter still echoed in the ballroom, bouncing between chandeliers and champagne glasses. To the Whitmores, mocking Danielle was just another game, another way to remind the room who held the power. But not everyone was laughing. A few servers exchanged uneasy glances. One young staffer whispered, "That's not right," though his voice was swallowed by the arrogance swirling around him. The matriarch of the Whitmore family, pearls strung proudly around her neck, leaned closer to Danielle with a smirk. "Sweetheart, you must have gotten lost. The kitchen's that way." Her manicured hand gestured lazily toward the service doors. Around her, investors chuckled, raising their glasses in smug approval. Danielle finally lowered her phone. Her gaze lifted, steady and calm, scanning the faces of those who mocked her. She did not speak, not yet. Instead, she reached for a glass of champagne, not to serve, but to sip. That simple act, so deliberate, unsettled the crowd. "What's she doing?" One of the men muttered under his breath. "She thinks she belongs here," another sneered. Belonging. That was the word they couldn't stomach. In their eyes, Danielle was an outsider. Too black, too female, too unpolished for their polished empire. But in truth, she was the sharpest presence in the room. At the back of the ballroom, a journalist named Allison adjusted her camera lens, intrigued. Something about Danielle's composure told her this was no ordinary guest. The camera clicked once, twice, capturing stillness in the middle of mockery. The tall Whitmore son, arrogant in his tuxedo, finally spoke up. His voice carried the weight of entitlement. "Ma'am, if you're not here to serve, you'll need to leave. This is a private event." That was the moment. The room leaned forward, expecting Danielle to shrink, to apologize, to walk away. Instead, she smiled. "Just slightly. I'll leave," she said softly, "when business is finished." Confusion rippled through the crowd. Business? What business could this woman possibly have here? Laughter bubbled again, nervous this time. The matriarch tilted her head, pearls glinting under the lights. "And what business would you have with us?" she asked, her tone sharp as glass. Danielle didn't answer immediately. She let the question hang heavy in the air. Then, with the same calmness she carried from the moment she entered, she tilted her head. "Check your phone." It was a challenge wrapped in silk. The tall Whitmore son frowned, pulling his phone from his pocket. The screen lit up, and in that instant the color drained from his face. His lips parted, but no sound came. Across the ballroom, other phones began to buzz, one after another, a ripple of vibrations cutting through the music. Guests glanced down at their screens, and whispers spread like wildfire. Whitmore Global loses $900 million. Deal transferred to Harlow Group. Effective immediately. The matriarch's hand trembled as she snatched her clutch, her manicured fingers fumbling over the screen. The headline glared back at her, unforgiving. Around them, murmurs grew louder. Some gasped. Some smirked. A tide was turning in real time. Danielle took a step forward. She didn't need to raise her voice. "I didn't have to call the press," she said evenly. "You did the work for me. All I did was let you be seen." The room froze. The same servers who had been silenced by the Whitmore's arrogance now stood taller. The young catering staffer whispered almost reverently, "She owns the room now." Phones rose into the air, recording, capturing the collapse of a dynasty in real time. Champagne glasses clinked too hard against the tables, ringing like alarm bells. The Whitmores, so sure of their untouchable power, looked suddenly small, fragile, human. And Danielle Brooks? She was just beginning. The ballroom, once filled with polished laughter and the clinking of champagne flutes, had turned eerily quiet. The only sounds now were the faint buzz of phones and the sharp breaths of those who had just seen $900 million evaporate. The Whitmore matriarch's pearls, which had moments ago been a symbol of authority, now looked like shackles around her trembling throat. Her eyes darted from guest to guest, desperate for support. None came. Even their closest advisors stood stiff, phones glowing in their hands, their expressions caught between shock and calculation. The tall son's jaw tightened. His pride battled with panic, but desperation won. He leaned toward Danielle, his voice breaking. "We can fix this." "No," the matriarch hissed at him, her voice low but sharp. "Don't you see? We've already lost." But Danielle wasn't finished. She stepped into the center of the ballroom, her movements deliberate, as though she were walking on a stage built for her and her alone. Cameras tracked her. Phones zoomed in. Every eye in the room shifted from the pearls and tuxedos of the Whitmores to the calm, unshakable presence of the woman they had mocked. "You thought my silence was weakness," Danielle began, her voice steady. "You thought ignoring me made me invisible. But the truth is this: power doesn't need to shout. Power doesn't need your permission to walk into a room. Power simply exists, whether you choose to see it or not." Murmurs rippled across the ballroom. One of the Whitmore advisors tried to step forward, his tone pleading. "Danielle, this isn't necessary. We can renegotiate." She didn't even turn toward him. "You had your chance when you thought I was a waitress, and you wasted it." The silence that followed was louder than thunder. The security guard who had hovered nearby finally spoke, his voice soft but firm. "Ma'am, my apologies." His words carried across the hush, not as a defense but as recognition. The small nod Danielle gave him wasn't forgiveness. It was acknowledgement. The quiet power of someone who didn't need to demand respect to command it. The matriarch's composure crumbled further. "We can make this right," she whispered desperately, her voice shaking now. Danielle's eyes locked onto hers. She didn't step closer in aggression, but with calm finality. "Right would have been recognizing me before I had to announce myself. Right would have been treating a stranger with dignity. Now all you have left is the deal you lost." The words struck like a hammer. From the far end of the ballroom, the young catering staffer spoke again, louder this time. "You don't get to erase someone twice." The line landed hard. Heads turned. Even the security guard nodded slowly. The truth was undeniable, echoing through the silence the Whitmores couldn't fill. And then, it began, a ripple of applause. One person clapped, then another, then a dozen. Scattered at first, but growing. It wasn't just applause. It was allegiance. It was the sound of power shifting, of loyalty leaving one family and rising to another. "Allison," the journalist whispered into her mic for her live stream. "This is what happens when power walks in quietly." The applause swelled. Glasses were set down with finality. Guests raised their phones higher, capturing not just a moment, but history unfolding. Danielle didn't bow. She didn't smile. She simply stood in her truth, unshaken. And in that golden, silent ballroom, the Whitmores realized the unthinkable. Their reign wasn't being challenged. It was being erased. The Whitmores stood frozen, pearls and tuxedos that once symbolized authority now looking like fragile costumes from a play gone wrong. The applause hadn't stopped. It rolled across the ballroom in waves, steady and undeniable. The tall son's face flushed crimson. He turned back toward Danielle, his voice cracking with desperation. "Look, we didn't—" "You did," Danielle cut in sharply, her voice slicing through the air like glass. "And now you live with it." The words landed like a verdict. There was no appeal, no negotiation. The matriarch clutched her pearls tighter, her knuckles pale. We can fix this," she muttered again, her tone more plea than command. But no one believed her anymore, not even the people standing closest to her. Phones buzzed across the room like a chorus. Another notification swept through the crowd. Screens lit up, faces dropped. Whitmore Global stock plunges. Investors pulled $200 million overnight. The guests erupted in whispers, their once polite conversations fracturing into sharp, panicked fragments. Some guests excused themselves mid-sentence, abandoning champagne flutes on marble tables to rush toward the exit. Others leaned into each other, speaking in urgent whispers. "They're finished. Pull out before it's too late." Danielle just buried them alive. The quartet in the corner, who had stopped playing earlier, began quietly packing their instruments. Even the music had abandoned the Whitmores. The tall son reached for his phone again. 3 missed calls from the Whitmore board chair flashed across the screen. His hand shook as he shoved it back into his pocket. The matriarch's clutch vibrated loudly on the table beside her, but she didn't dare answer. Each ring was like a public reprimand, a reminder that their empire was crumbling in real time. Danielle didn't move. She didn't gloat. She let the silence and chaos do the work for her. Allison's camera captured everything. The pearls trembling, the missed calls, the flushed faces. Into her microphone she whispered for her live stream. "The Whitmores are imploding in real time. This is history." And then came the sound that cut deepest of all, chairs scraping back. Guests, one by one, were standing. Not to honor the Whitmores, but to walk away from them. Some drifted toward Danielle, their body language announcing where their loyalties now lay. Others headed for the exits, unwilling to be seen sinking with a collapsing dynasty. The catering staffer, who had spoken earlier, leaned toward a colleague, his voice steady and clear. "They're radioactive now. No one wants to be seen shaking their hands." He was right. The Whitmore circle was dissolving into scattered fragments, their advisors whispering frantically into phones, their PR handlers rushing in with tablets, their investors already pivoting toward Danielle and her allies. Rebecca, Danielle's chief of staff, appeared at her side with a sleek tablet. Her voice was calm, efficient. "All Harlow contracts are signed. Per your instruction, we've revoked Whitmore's access to the Brooks Global Investor Portal." Danielle gave a single nod. "Good. Make sure every vendor and supplier in our network gets the memo before midnight." "Already drafting," Rebecca replied, her fingers gliding across the screen. "Do you want me to CC their legal? Bury them in it." "Yes," Danielle said, her tone as calm as if she were ordering coffee. "Bury them?" The tall son's voice cracked again, this time breaking completely. You can't just lock us out." Danielle finally turned her head toward him, her gaze cold, unflinching. "Agreements are built on respect. You voided that clause before tonight even started." The room gasped. One investor, whispering just loud enough for nearby phones to pick up, said, "She's freezing them out entirely." Rebecca's tablet pinged. "Done," she murmured. "Vendor notices sent. Logins disabled." Danielle didn't smile. She simply gave her next order. "Send the same to the press. Word it as a values decision. Make it clear we don't partner with people who humiliate others in public." Rebecca tapped the screen, and in that instant the Whitmore's empire shattered. The matriarch's voice broke at last, trembling under the weight of collapse. This is vindictive." Danielle stepped closer, her tone steady, unyielding. "No, this is responsible leadership. If you think it's harsh, you should consider how it felt to stand here and be told I didn't belong in the deal I built." The ballroom erupted, not with music, but with the sound of history being rewritten. The ballroom was no longer the Whitmore's stage, it was Danielle's arena now. Every eye, every phone, every whisper orbited around her. Where the family once commanded awe, they now stood as relics of arrogance, their empire crumbling under the weight of their own pride. Rebecca leaned closer, lowering her voice. The press release is already climbing Twitter trends. You're everywhere, Forbes, Bloomberg, CNBC. She paused, then smirked. Even Vogue is calling. They want to comment on your dress. Danielle didn't laugh. She didn't break composure. Good, let them talk. The more they talk, the faster the Whitmores vanish. Allison, still live streaming, approached cautiously, her voice reverent. Ms. Brooks, can I ask, what does this moment mean to you? Danielle turned her gaze toward the camera, her expression calm but commanding. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. This moment means that power doesn't belong to the loudest voices in the room, she said, each word crisp and deliberate. It belongs to those who respect the table they sit at. It belongs to those who understand that leadership isn't about intimidation, it's about integrity. And tonight, integrity won. The room broke into applause again, but this time it was softer, more deliberate. Not the chaotic roar of gossip and shock, but the sound of people recognizing truth when they heard it. The tall son stumbled back toward Danielle, his face desperate, his pride stripped away. Please, he said, his voice almost trembling, we can make this right. Just give us one chance to explain. Danielle didn't flinch. She looked at him, then at the matriarch, then at the father, who still stood in stunned silence. You had your chance, she replied evenly. You mocked me in front of the very people who built this room with me. And now you want mercy? You don't get to humiliate people when it suits you and beg forgiveness when it costs you. The father finally spoke, his voice cracking under pressure. You'll regret this. We've held this market for decades. Danielle stepped closer, her heels clicking against the marble, the sound sharp as a gavel. Correction, you held it. Tonight you lost it, and not because I destroyed you. You destroyed yourselves. All I did was stop pretending you still mattered. The ballroom stilled again. Those words didn't just end a deal, they ended a dynasty. Rebecca's tablet buzzed again. She leaned in. CNN just pushed the headline. Black CEO walks away from $900 deal after public humiliation. Whitmore empire in freefall. Danielle gave the smallest nod. Good. That's the headline history will remember. One of the investors, a man who had known the Whitmores for years, rose from his seat and walked toward Danielle. He extended his hand, firm and respectful. Ms. Brooks, if you ever need backing, you have it. Tonight you proved you're not just a CEO, you're the standard. Others followed. One by one, hands extended, offers whispered, loyalty shifting. The Whitmores watched as their allies evaporated into thin air, walking straight into Danielle's corner. The matriarch's pearls slipped from her hand at last, tumbling to the floor in a soft, pitiful scatter. No one bent to help her. Danielle's voice carried across the room one final time. Understand this. Leadership is not inherited. It is earned. Every day, every decision, and tonight the world saw the difference. Silence fell, not of fear, but of recognition. A line had been drawn and no one could cross it back. Danielle turned, her gown sweeping the marble as she walked out. She didn't wait for applause. She didn't need validation. The room had already crowned her without saying a word. Outside the ballroom doors, cameras flashed, microphones stretched forward, reporters shouting her name. But Danielle didn't rush. She paused, looked directly at the lights, and said only one thing before stepping into her waiting car. Dignity is worth more than any deal. Remember that. And with that, the doors closed, sealing the night where power changed hands forever. The limousine door shut softly behind Danielle, muffling the roar of cameras and questions outside. Inside, the air was calm, leather-scented, tinted glass shutting out the frenzy of flashing lights. Rebecca sat across from her, tablet already glowing with updates, while Allison, still flushed with adrenaline from the live stream, typed furiously into her phone. Your face is everywhere, Rebecca reported, scrolling through headlines. Orbs, the night integrity outshone power. Bloomberg CEO Danielle Brooks cancels $900 deal in historic rebuke. Even the BBC is running it as breaking news. She paused, then added with a faint smirk, #Brooks standard is trending worldwide. Danielle leaned back against the seat, her expression steady, almost unreadable. Good. That means people aren't just watching. They're listening. Rebecca's brow furrowed. The Whitmore's stock is in freefall, down 37% since the speech. Their board is panicking. Their lawyers are scrambling to stop the bleeding, but she shook her head. They won't recover from this. Danielle closed her eyes briefly, not in triumph but in clarity. They had an empire and they built it on arrogance. That's not a foundation, it's quicksand. Tonight just made it visible. Allison chimed in from her corner, her voice brimming with awe. The comments on the stream are unreal. People are calling you the new face of corporate justice. Some are even saying you gave every underdog a reason to believe. Danielle turned to her, her gaze softening slightly. Let's be clear, Allison. I didn't do this to be a symbol. I did this because no amount of money excuses disrespect. But if it gives people hope, then it was worth more than the deal itself. Rebecca's tablet buzzed again. She skimmed quickly. Your investors are calling this the boldest move of the decade. 3 just confirmed they're doubling down on our partnerships. And Harlow? They want to announce a joint venture with Brooks Global tomorrow morning. Danielle nodded.
Set it up.
Let the world see that when one door closes, another opens. But only if you're not afraid to walk away. The car wound through the city, lights blurring against the windows. Outside, billboards already flashed Danielle's face from captured livestream screenshots. The words "dignity over deals" scrolled beneath her image, turned into a slogan within hours. Meanwhile, across town, the Whitmore's glass tower loomed in silence. News crews had already stationed themselves outside, catching panicked executives rushing in and out. Anonymous sources leaked that the board was preparing an emergency vote to remove the matriarch and her son from leadership. The dynasty was collapsing before the world's eyes. Rebecca, seeing the reports, looked up. They're finished. But tonight you didn't just win, you set a precedent. CEOs, politicians, leaders everywhere. They'll point to this night for years. Danielle's gaze turned toward the window, watching the skyline glide past. Good. Then let's make sure they don't just remember my defiance. They remember the standard that came with it. The car pulled into Brooks Global headquarters, a towering structure of steel and glass, its lights burning bright against the night. Employees were gathered outside, cheering as Danielle stepped from the vehicle. Phones rose in the air, flashes lit the street, and chants echoed. Brooks! 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 For the first time that evening, Danielle allowed herself a small smile. Not of ego, but of gratitude. She raised a hand not to silence them, but to steady them. Go home, she called gently. Rest, tomorrow we build. Tonight wasn't just a victory for me. It was a victory for every one of us who refuses to bow to arrogance. The crowd erupted louder, their voices carrying into the night sky. Inside her office, high above the city, Danielle stood by the window. The lights below looked like a galaxy she now had the power to shape. Rebecca placed a folder on her desk. Proposals, partnerships, opportunities that had come flooding in within hours. Danielle didn't touch it yet. Instead, she whispered to herself almost like a vow. I didn't just walk away from a deal. I walked into history. The morning sun painted the city gold, but for the Whitmores, dawn brought only shadows. Their glass tower was swarmed by reporters, shareholders, and protesters carrying hastily printed signs. Respect arrogance. We stand with Brooks. Inside, the once untouchable family faced their board in a grim emergency session. For decades, the Whitmores had ruled with intimidation, but now even their allies demanded accountability. The matriarch's pearls lay in a dish before her, forgotten. Her son stared blankly at stock tickers bleeding red. Meanwhile, across the city, Brooks Global headquarters pulsed with energy. The building had become a symbol overnight, a place where integrity had triumphed over money. News vans lined the street. Employees entered with their heads held higher, their sense of pride swelling. Inside her office, Danielle moved with deliberate calm. Her team buzzed around her. Rebecca with investor updates, Allison preparing a documentary pitch, communications staff fielding nonstop calls from media and governments alike. Rebecca placed a document on Danielle's desk. Harlow just confirmed the joint venture, projected to generate $1.2 billion in 5 years. Bigger than the Whitmore deal ever was. Danielle signed without hesitation. Then we move forward. But remember, this isn't just about money. It's about building partnerships that reflect who we are. Allison leaned forward, eyes gleaming. Do you realize what you did last night? You didn't just cancel a deal. You gave every underestimated person a blueprint for how to demand respect. Danielle met her gaze, her tone firm but warm. Then let's make sure they know the blueprint doesn't stop here. Power without purpose is nothing. If we don't lift others as we rise, then we've missed the point. Rebecca's tablet buzzed again. CNN wants you for a primetime interview. BBC, too. But the most interesting request, Howard University invited you to give a commencement speech. They said your story is already being studied in their business ethics course. Danielle paused, absorbing that. A faint smile crossed her lips. Good. Then that's where I start. Not with Wall Street. With students. With the future. News alerts continued to pour in. Whitmore board ousts leadership. Family fortune in freefall. Investors pivot to Brooks Global. The dynasty that once mocked Danielle was unraveling thread by thread. But Danielle didn't celebrate their ruin. She had bigger horizons in sight. By evening, she stood before her employees in the Brooks Global Auditorium. The room was packed, the atmosphere electric. Cameras streamed live across multiple platforms. Danielle stepped onto the stage in a tailored black suit, no pearls, no theatrics, just presence. She waited for silence, then spoke. Last night wasn't about me, she began. It wasn't about a deal. It was about a truth. No one has the right to tell you that you don't belong at the table you built. Applause thundered, but she raised her hand gently to continue. I want every young entrepreneur watching to know, your value is not measured by their approval. Your dignity is not for sale. And when you choose integrity over arrogance, you do more than win a deal, you change the rules of the game. The audience rose to its feet, clapping and cheering, some with tears in their eyes. Rebecca, standing backstage, whispered to Allison, she's not just a CEO anymore. She's a movement. Allison nodded, her camera fixed on Danielle. This is bigger than business. This is history. Danielle's final words echoed through the hall, carried into living rooms and phones across the globe. We didn't lose 900 million. We gained something priceless, the power to lead on our own terms. And we will never give that back. The ovation shook the walls. In that moment, it was clear. Danielle Brooks wasn't just rewriting corporate etiquette. She was carving a legacy that no dynasty could erase. The Whitmore's mansion, once the stage for endless galas, stood quiet. No music spilled from its halls. No reporters begged for interviews. The once celebrated dynasty had become a cautionary tale. Their arrogance, immortalized in the viral videos of Danielle's confrontation, was studied not as a symbol of power, but as a lesson in downfall. Meanwhile, Brooks Global soared. The Harlow partnership set new records, but more importantly, it opened doors for countless entrepreneurs who had been told they didn't belong. Grants were launched, mentorship programs began, and a new initiative called Tables We Build offered funding to minority founders across the globe. Danielle became more than a CEO. She became a voice. Her speeches filled auditoriums, her interviews broke ratings, and her story was cited in classrooms from New York to Nairobi. She wasn't idolized for wealth alone, but for the way she wielded it, with clarity, with responsibility, and with fire. 1 year after the gala, Danielle stood again beneath chandeliers, not in the Whitmore ballroom, but in the United Nations headquarters. Leaders from every continent sat before her. Cameras broadcast her words worldwide. She looked out over the assembly, her tone steady, her presence undeniable. Power is not inherited. It is not given by last names or guarded behind velvet ropes. Power is earned moment by moment in how we treat people. Last year I was told I didn't belong in a room I paid for, and I say to you today, no one decides your worth but you. Not their laughter, not their prejudice, not their arrogance. You belong because you choose to build, to lead, and to rise. Applause thundered through the chamber. It wasn't polite or restrained, it was raw, carried by people who had felt the sting of dismissal and now saw hope reflected in her stance. Far from the cameras, in a quiet office, the Whitmore matriarch watched the broadcast. Her pearls were gone, her influence shattered. For the first time in her life, she understood the cost of underestimating a woman who refused to bow. Danielle didn't know or care. She had moved beyond them. Her eyes were on the future, on every young leader who would never again accept the lie that they didn't belong. And with that, the story of humiliation had become the story of history.